All right, before we get started, Brad said I could take a couple minutes to share a little story with you. I'd never really had a chance to say how much I appreciate all you guys supporting Linda White over the years, and especially the MDF guys when it came to buying cutting frames when we first started in 2006, 2007, 2008. I mean, all you guys supported us in some way, and believe me, we really appreciate it. Thanks. There was one thing that always occurred to me that when Dave and I said we were going to go in business together, and we never saw it coming until it hit us really hard. I'm going to tell you a story about that. A guy goes into a car dealership and says, I want to buy that new car. He goes, let's write it up. He goes, I want everything on it. All right, let's write it up. And writing it up, and he says, hey, I forgot to tell you something. I only want the car if you teach me how to drive. And Rose Engine Work is a little like that. We learned that if we sold you a machine, we're going to have to teach you how to drive. And that fell mostly on that big guy's shoulders back there. So not only did he help me out, he helped a lot of guys out. So let's give Dave Lindo a big hand. All right, let's get started. All right. When we talk about rosettes, everybody's got their favorite. And I've actually ran into guys who said, when the machine came to me, it had 10 rosettes on it, and that was 8 years ago. It has still the same ones. And oh my God, you're killing me. Martin Strand over here likes this one that we put out when we first started, and it was called Oak Leaf. But we had another one that was its little brother that I nicknamed Fish Lips. And Martin's got this killer project with Fish Lips on it, and he was the first guy in about 8 years that says, hey, does anybody else use that? And I said, absolutely not. Nobody experiments with all the rosettes they have and all the different rubbers. And so I just would like to say, this one right here has always, I don't know if I can't see the red dot, this one at the far right, on the far upper right, is my favorite. And I don't know anyone else who hardly ever uses it. And if you use it on the left hand, on the right hand side of the machine, you get a Texaco type pattern out of it. It's 5 large bumps with 7 little bumps on each. It is rock and roll dynamite, and nobody uses it because I feel a lot of people have just stopped experimenting. And the wooden one at the top is a version of that, and that's how David and I first started making them. A friend of mine made them out of wood. We'd try them. If we liked it, they made it into the first 10 or 20. Nesting your tools. I have all these adapters on the bottom here. They are for almost exclusively to Lindo White, but they're for this chuck, this thing I made, that thing. If you don't nest your tools, when you need that one, you're never going to find it. You're not going to find it in my shop, I'll guarantee you that. But it lives in that piece of styrofoam. This, I got 500 guilloche cutters and a deal with some antique machinery, and out of them was about 80 of them that were pretty interesting, and I nested all those, and in the back, that might be 30 different type of rubbers. There's another stand with 25 more. I have about 55 altogether. And if they don't go back in there, and I've got 3 Lindo Whites, I used to have 4, I'm never going to find them. So nest your tools and put them away when you're done. This is about as interesting as can be, and you can make it in no time at all. There's a guy named Peter Holtzby in England who saw my second spindle project, and he is a clock guy, and he put it on the right side with no big 1-inch shaft going the whole length of the machine. He has a piece of plate in the back that hooks to the 2 screws on the back of the machine. They're both 3/8, and this plate has a shaft coming out of it with a 3/8 shaft that rotates on the inside of there, made out of brass. and that's his second spindle. It is short and stocky and close to the machine, and all you got to do is back up your tower and screw it back in. I probably have to drill a hole in your base, and I even figured out a way to get rid of this third arm, and that was by milling a slot in the back. So you're always going from one gear, smaller gear on second spindle, to a big gear, which is in the back. So it's just guys sharing ideas, and they're thousands of miles apart. And I have found that some things that I do on the second spindle on my machine, which is on the other side, I get no distortion. And I do the same setup on this side, and things are distorted, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why, but it's just gonna take some time playing with it, and I think this has a lot of promise. John Sauer mentioned this book this morning. Sauer, what's the last name? Sauer something or other? Right, I couldn't even pronounce it. At any rate, I could never figure out what that machine looked like, so I've gone down a long rabbit hole trying to come up with gears and ratios to get things like this. And now that I've seen the machine, even it's a poor picture, I'm almost certain that this winter that's going to be my project to make that type of Rose engine. And this book, by the way, is in German, so that just makes this, the idea of trying to figure out how that guy did these sorts of patterns even more difficult. David Lindo has got a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. And if you ever see him struggling to pull a large amplitude rosette pattern around, he just puts his big mitts on the top of that barrel and just slowly moves it around. And that's great for him. He's a big guy with a big hand. I don't have that. A cheap aluminum aluminum pulley with a thumb screw right on the back, and that's what I use to pull these large ratio patterns that I'm doing when I multiply things and I get 1.25 inch amplitude on a Lindo white. You need a friend. And if your hand's not as big as a catcher's mitt, that's your friend. I came up with this idea on a Sunday morning in 2012. I drew every one of these pieces up, and it's in the OTI newsletter around 2012. The key to this, and it's really easy to make, is that this piece right here, which I think I bought 3 of them from different places. That little ratchet has to be the finest ratchet you could buy, and I think it was $28 from Sears. And it does what I call really good work. However, if you're a clock dial guy, you probably should go to the one David sells. But for earrings and just playing with guilloche, this works very well. At Boeing, they beat it into our head about ergonomics. And that is how you sit in a chair, how you move on your desk, what type of chair you sit in. At the end of the day, they don't want you going home tired, crick in the neck. I'm only 5'10", my arms aren't that long. If you reach to the back of your machine for 4, 5, 6 hours to do guilloche because you love it, and you're smaller than 5'10", it's a stretch to reach to the back. So I put the crossing plate on the front, and I can sit in a chair and phase. The only thing I don't have is I don't have a worm. And most of the things I make, I don't use the worm. So this works just fine. I bought a little cheap $10 adjustable arm light that I never did like for my wood lathe. So before I threw it away, I took it and I put a little 1/4-20 screw it right at the end here, drilled and tapped that 1/4-20, put that on the end, and when I can't get those belts to stop vibrating, I just push them up a little bit until they touch, vibration gone. Okay. If somebody would have told me 10 years ago I could make these on my Linda White, I would have said you were out of your mind. But when you start multiplying rosettes and then you start pulling the rosettes off center, you get some pretty cool stuff. And that old guy in Germany, he's long been dead, but he's probably saying, see, I knew someday somebody would be inspired, and I am really inspired. This is some pretty crazy stuff, and I think this is the only way, multiplying rosettes and pulling the rosette off center, they turn out pretty nice. Now, before I came to this show, I talked to John Edwards, and it's a shame he didn't make it, but over in England, you know, those guys are sometimes years ahead of us. They've seen things that we haven't seen quite yet. And I said, I am on the passion and pursuit of figuring out how that guy did this. And I found that when I'm doing paper and pen patterns, trying to figure out, does this rosette and this ratio and that rubber make something aesthetically pretty, I get at least 20 ugly, hideous paper patterns before I hit pay dirt, and this is the sort of thing that I'm looking for. And he goes, and his response was 20 to 1, that's about right. So if you had a lifetime of playing with a machine, and that old man probably didn't have TV, and he may not have even had a radio, he had a lot more time to play than we did. So that's why you see these huge cases of these little 2.5-inch discs with these knockout dynamite patterns, because he had the time and a lot of us don't. However, I think we're on the right track here. Okay, this is my second spindle. Big gear here. This, of course, gear means nothing. And there's a little gear right here on a 1-inch hollow piece of brass, and all the weight is going off the right side of the machine with a small cable and a bag of pennies over there, and another tower over there. And that came out of English Mechanics from 1883. And I had to read that story 3 times, and on the 3rd time, I'm running to get a piece of paper because it finally hit. They didn't have cameras back then. The guy had a really, really cruddy sketch and Old English, and the way he wrote, it just didn't click. It didn't click, and the 3rd time, boom. And this is all just rudimentary machine shop stuff. There's nothing there that's fancy, but that's what that second spindle looks like on the right side of the machine. This is just parts you can buy from Shoreline, and it's an oval chuck. I made it. It actually was not hard. There's nothing super hard about making an oval chuck. However, that brass cam ring came off an antique machine. I got the cam ring with a bunch of old machines, and I never threw it away, and it just happens to fit with a little bit of a riser underneath it to be on the same center line as my machine. And those little paddles right here, which are hooked to the slide, follow that, and when I loosen the screws and pull the cam ring off center, it makes beautiful ovals, and it's almost all 99% store-bought parts except for a cam ring. This was John Edwards' idea that he threw to me in an email like 7 years ago. He goes, Steve, I have an idea called a swiveling bridging rubber, but I don't really know how to make it. I just have an idea that 2 rubbers touching at the same time that would swivel in the middle would work. Could you think about that? And I made 6 different versions that looked nothing like this. So don't think I made 6 versions of this. I did not. There's all types of things mechanically that'll touch two different rosettes at the same time. However, this is my favorite because these tips here allow it to when it's swiveling, the whole face of the rubber is on the face of the rosette, not hitting just this edge, which a couple of them did, right up on the edge as they rocked. However, there's something really neat, and you don't know what's going to happen until you see it. This one is closer to the center than this one. And guess what your pattern is? It has more of this rosette than this does because it's farther away from the pivot point. And also, this is easy 101 machine shop. There's nothing special about it. But the two rosettes I've learned that gives you the most aesthetically pleasing looks are something that's really plain, like an oval, and something with bumps. Something that's got a lot going on with something that doesn't have a lot going on. And you marry the two, and you get some really, really nice stuff. This is a vertical drilling attachment. You can put anything you want right in here. Any kind of mandrel, slitting saw, and I'll show you what you're going to do with that slitting saw in a minute. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't see the dot at all.
Right here. Drill doesn't show. I think it's running out of juice.
It's there, but it's small.
Take NFS and go down.
Yeah, right here. NFS is the center line of that drilling frame. You can put, yep, it's right over here. So at any rate, that's a different type of drilling frame, and you can even use the side of an end mill for that. At any rate, when I mentioned slitting saw, you can get different thicknesses of slitting saws. This one's 22 thousandths thick, which was perfect because I found some 20 thousandths black veneer. So when I made this Christmas ornament, and you fire that up, I just buried it in there. At the bottom of I used the bottom of a rosette as my indexer, brought it in, watched the number, brought it out, did that 12 times, put the contrasting colored veneer in there, put it back in the lathe before it was the Christmas ornament, and I turned it off, turned all the waste away, and you'd probably have a hard time, a regular wood turner would have a hard time trying to figure out how you got that colored wood in there so accurately. There's a lot you can do with this if you have an imagination. This, I don't think I've showed it to too many people, but if you wanted to use your carriage cross slide to do large coves, you really can't because you're stuck too far in front where it belongs. So I made this a little aluminum fixture to where you could put your tool post to the right and way back on your slide. As you can see, now you just loosen the grub screws on the side, and as you turn it, you can use it to make large concave flutes on anything. And I also phased it up on the front. I guess you can't see it because this doesn't work anymore. But right up on the tip, I phased it, and I went back over just the tip, and so that has a different look to it. And that's an easy, you can make that fixture in a day. It really does nice work. I'm going to need somebody else's pointer because this is the coolest thing I brought. Who's got that other pointer? Here, I have to throw it, I'm mic'd up. Okay. I appreciate it. I've never seen another thing like this. I was at Gold's a long time ago, and I found this in a wet cardboard box, so you know it has to be very valuable. I knew what it was as soon as I saw it. It is a brocading attachment for a Rose engine. And because the salesman didn't even know what it was, meant it was even more valuable. And I was jumping up and down when I left. Okay, this is what it is. This big gear goes on to where your first rosette would go. There was a cast iron plate that went right here on this part here that held a 4.5-inch piece of artwork that a brocading machine would read with the finger. You see the teeth in the gear here. Let's just guess and say they were 3/16 deep. You have to pick a rosette that's going to bump, that doesn't bump very deep at all, because you can't come out of these teeth. You know, it's a very low amplitude rosette you're going to have to pick. At any rate, these teeth, made up with this, made up with some other gears on the back, they come down here, down to this shaft, down to this 45-degree, which turns the handle, which turns this, and this is one continuous line across your work. One continuous line while it's rocking. And there's no cranking. You're cranking the machine, but this is doing all your work for you. When you're done, you really can't tell you've got one continuous line, but that's what you do have. However, the tooling that went from here down to here, some tapped hole, and then a bunch of tapped holes here, I only got 2 pieces of it. I could never figure out how it would work, and all that wound up in the trash, and all I wound up with was all of this. But I did get it all to work. David made this gear for me, and I made a few other things to make all this work. But it would have been nice if I had the tooling that read, that went from here up to there, and the thought of doing brocading work on a modern rose engine really appeals to me. I made my own pattern bars. There's a whole YouTube video. That's A2. If you take your time, you can make a nice pattern bar in about 45 minutes. And there's lots of different ways you can do it. I think that's maximum is 5 inches, which is about all you need anyway. Just take your time, and you can cut steel on a straight line attachment as long as you can make something as rudimentary as that little holding fixture to hold the stock. Gorst gave me this idea. He said this was the golden mean ratio rosette, 1 to 1.618. I made it out. He told me about it. He let me copy something, and I wound up with that. And what does that do? And most people know, if you've watched YouTube, I think one of the guys was at my house and put it on YouTube. That, by the way, makes a beautiful, beautiful butterfly at about 1.5 inches. That ugly old rosette makes a beautiful butterfly at 1.5 inches. But you got a double bump rubber, the corners, turn it into a beautiful butterfly. By the way, if you don't have double bump rubbers, you should at least make 2 or 3 different sizes, because every once in a while, they really make something pop. By the way, this is also a straight rubber. Hardly anybody uses it, and I use them all the time because they are very useful in a lot of different ways. However, if you're using it on this, and once you cross center line, you're not double bumping, that butterfly turns into a bumblebee. And that's pretty cool. That's it. I appreciate it.